Hey leaders, welcome to the show. I am here with Mark Ashby today. Mark has extensive experience in the military and is joining us from Sydney, Australia. He now works with multinational organizations, helping them with crisis management, high performance leadership, and navigating cultural transitions. Because of the specialist roles that he has held in the Australian military and the 11 years that he served in Iraq, Mark has seen a lot. He understands the contextual pressures of a war zone where crisis and complexity is life or death. He has seen the behaviors and the leadership skill sets and mindsets that allow for truly adaptable leadership and teamwork to happen in the most dire of conditions. And as we get into in the episode, the levels of complexity, chaos, and crisis that we're seeing on a global scale are not going away anytime soon. So, what can executives, business owners, and self leaders learn from Mark's wisdom and time in the military? What are the leadership behaviors that allow us to be truly adaptable and fearless in the face of crisis? How can we take care of ourselves and the health and well-being of each other so that we don't lose access to our receptivity, awareness of our surroundings, and the collective intelligence that is possible within high-performing teams? And since we're talking about crisis here, how do we do all of that while processing our own loss and grief along the way? Loss often comes up in the face of change and transition. Mark has experienced a level of loss, threat, and danger that most of us will be too privileged and too comfortable to ever experience in our lifetimes. For so many reasons, it's not even fair to compare work culture to a war zone. And yet sometimes, particularly in toxic teams or under toxic leadership, it can feel pretty high stakes. It can feel like a threat. It can feel dangerous to our nervous systems and our emotional or mental well-being. When stakes are as high as they are for our species and our planet, we can't afford to not transform leadership and transform our work cultures. We have to be able to be resilient and adaptable enough to respond to crises, whether those crises are internal or external. So I can think of no better person than Mark Ashby to be joining me in this conversation today around how we navigate the complexity, ambiguity, and chaos that can come with crisis management and big cultural shifts. Because we're in one, we're in a really big one right now. So without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Mark Ashby. Mark, I'm so grateful to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for being here.
It's so fantastic, Nicole, to be here. Real pleasure.
Thank you. I know there's a lot we can dive into, and I want to help frame up our conversation a little bit because I think our audience is really going to benefit from the wisdom that you're bringing, especially around crisis management. As you know, I work a lot with sustainability professionals and executives, and we find ourselves very much in this context where complexity is only on the rise. There are so many crises that are happening side by side, whether it's the climate crises, our mental health crisis, all of the shifts that we're seeing in work culture with quiet quitting. I mean, the list just goes on and on. And you've probably heard this term VUCA before, right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I feel so deeply that that's not going away anytime soon. So here we have an expert on crisis management. And to drop us into that wisdom, I would love to start by just hearing more about your story and how you became an expert in this area.
Yeah, I've taken a bit of a different road, I suppose, to the average person. I left school. I grew up at the beach. I'm a real grew up in that whole surf environment in Sydney, and that was my life. You're pretty much living by the beach, and that's all you care about. you're at school and all you care about. I grew up near the beach at school, so I was in the surfing team there, and that was my life. As much as I could do that. My father was a good surfer as well, and that's what you think your life's going to be, somewhere aligned with that. So, but I always had this fascination with the military as well, strangely enough, and I got to that sort of middle sort of 20s age and had a bit of a conversation with my father about life, about what to do with my life. And so I went off and joined the military and got into the paratroopers, which was my dream at the time, into that specialty role. And that took me then on a most, I suppose, amazing journey that I never thought would ever happen. Some of the countries that I've worked in that I've never even really heard of, at the time. And I went off. I was around about 2004. I actually left the military. I got offered an opportunity to go to the Middle East, into Iraq, as a private contractor. So I at the time, the army was a bit ambiguous whether we were going to go into operations or not. And every soldier, they all want to go. They all want to go to operations. They don't want to sit at home. And we all saw what was going on around the world, in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's like being, I suppose, it's like being an athlete. You don't want to be just training. You want to be actually racing or competing. And it's the same with that specialty soldiering. You want to be part of it. So I took a position to go to Iraq, thinking I may last over there for a year or two, and then maybe go back into the military. But 11 years later, it was one of those situations where the position that I was in, it gave me opportunities that I never would have imagined. Like I spoke to you about before, working with the United States, alongside their specialty soldiers over there as a private contractor, which was just incredible. And it's never happened in history, some of the things we did over there. And that took me over there for all those years. I ended up working in the diplomatic sector as well. I was working at the Australian Embassy, looking after our ambassador there for a few years, a lovely lady ambassador. And yeah, I ended up coming back to Australia about 2015 at Christmas time. Went back to university. Went to university at 48 to do my master's degree in counterterrorism, which was a huge, I suppose, if you want to call it, it was a big hurdle at that time of my life, going back at my age and with all the differences, I suppose, in learning, with everything now on technology wise, and the learning platforms and your online libraries, and which was a huge learning experience for me to do that. And it was actually one of the best things I've ever done. Pretty terrifying, to be honest, at my age to do that, but I ended up having a great experience, and I was absolutely thrilled with my whole time there and my results, and that then allowed me to then, I suppose, morph into my own dream of having my own business. I wanted to do something that I could use all my years and years of skills and what I'd acquired and all that experience to I suppose, just to really one for myself, something that I really want to do because I love doing it day in, day out. And then also that real byproduct of that is you get to help people in their own environments, their own worlds, help them to become, I suppose, safer and smarter and better in their own worlds. And so that's where I'm at right now, and it's something that I love to do. For me, it's not a job. It truly isn't a job, and I love doing it.
Thank you for walking us through that arc. I really see how the on the ground experience then sort of flowed into the study chapter of life in the counterterrorism, and now translating all of those gifts into working with people to bring this wisdom to light through your business. And I can't help but hone in on the magnitude of the crises that you would have been experiencing, maybe sometimes on a daily basis while you were on mission and serving. And I think sometimes in business, things can feel like it's life or death. It can feel like it's urgent. Our nervous system is up in arms. We're freaking out. It's where we get into that reactive zone where we feel like we can't fail. There's something so at high stake here that we have to press on. But you were really in life or death situations. The stakes were even higher than in business. And I'm so curious to learn what were some of the lessons, what were some of the patterns that you noticed as you were in this crisis management and beginning to witness what effective leadership looked like in the face of crisis.
Look, I think in that high pressure environment, especially in that war zone environment, and the mission tempo that we had, that we're not like the normal average soldier that may be going out there and doing their patrols or whatever they're doing. And it's still, of course, it's extremely dangerous for them, and they've got to be aware every day. For us, we were so busy, and you may sometimes get a day off per week if you were lucky, maybe a day off a fortnight, and you might be working nighttime as well. And it's all about you're managing yourself and then managing also your team, taking advice from all those leaders around you. I was very fortunate to work under a 2-star US general there for a while. He was a fantastic man that really taught me a lot about juggling professionalism, but also managing your burnout and managing your people, and also having that real empathetic approach. He was a fantastic man, and I learned a lot from him about how to actually do it all quite calmly as well. No point getting animated or sort of aggressive with your people, because it basically doesn't achieve anything in the end. You've got to really look after your people, and that was something that I really saw from him, having such a huge responsibility to look after all those thousands of men and women over there and do it so well. And it really just puts into perspective, because for us in that environment, you can't just make a big mistake and go to work on Monday morning and have a team meeting in the corporate sector and reset and think, how do we do this differently the next time? How do we get it, do it better? For us, if we had that big blunder, maybe somebody lost a body part, lost one of their legs, or maybe they lost their life. And you've got to then deal with that and the repercussions of that, and the knock-on effect of that person and their family, if they've got children. It's a massive responsibility, and it's not for everybody. I think a lot of leaders maybe think, oh, I could maybe do that role, but in reality, it's a position that not many of us can really pull off, because it's a real small percentage of people can actually get into that high stakes leadership role where you're facing that threat every single day.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have weekends over there. You don't have Saturday or Sunday to go for a surf or play golf or whatever you do. You're on it every single day, and you've got to be up for that challenge every single day. So it's the highest of high pressure environments. It really is. It's like being in a elite sports. It's like an elite sports team, and you're in that team every day. It's like a NBA team that you're in every single day that has to perform at that elite level. It's actually pretty amazing to be part of it, to see all these incredible operators around you and how they go about their own business and how they pull together every day and perform so professionally. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'm really hearing the connection between how high stakes it actually is, and how high performance is required for that context. And as you were speaking, I was just imagining people finding themselves rising into that as needed, and as they grew as leaders in that context. And I'm curious if you could share more about how has your perception of what leadership is evolved over time, and what is high performance leadership to you at this point, having had all of this experience?
I think there's a bit of maybe a disconnect between a lot of leaders that are, especially I see it now in corporate and that environment, that are very successful. The company's very successful. Maybe they're earning, big money, big salaries, and they may categorize themselves as being high performers. But to me, high performers, they don't sit idle. They don't sit still. They're not afraid to go out and take on new ventures, or, when they fail, they don't take it to heart either. I find a lot of high performers, especially overseas in operations, they make a mistake, they learn from it, they adapt, and they think, okay, how can we get better next time? And they just move forward. They don't dwell on that mistake for days and weeks on end. And there really is that small percentage, I think, of leaders that can be really come true high performers. And it's a very sort of interesting sphere. And I think as you become more experienced in your own career, you learn to identify those people better. It was a term back then, I suppose, in that early 2004, 2005, of what is a high performer. I just started to learn what this sort of, if you want to call it a term or phrase or, designation is. What's a high performer? And I've learned over the years now, over a couple of decades of dealing with those people, you've learned who they are and how to spot them, and how incredible some of them are. Not all of them. Some of them are so obsessed with being I suppose at the apex of their profession, that they maybe lose sight a little bit of the people around them. But the ones that can juggle it and that can get it right between that high performance and also really dragging their own people along with them, they're the special ones. The ones that you want to be like, that you aspire to be like, you think, I want to be like that person. And I worked under a couple of, like I said before, a couple of great people. I had a lady ambassador that I looked after and worked with there for a good few years in Iraq as well. And she was an amazing person and taught me a lot about the same thing about being professional on that daily basis. And so it's really an interesting concept. And like I said, there's a lot of leaders, and you get it in C-suite especially, and they will think they're all high performers, and they are extremely successful. They run that organization. Some of them run several. They're on multiple boards, multiple appointments. But do I categorize them as an actual high performer? Some of them I would say to them, no, I don't categorize that person as a high performer, because they're quite comfortable in their role. They're happy being at the top, but being comfortable in that position, and they don't want to sort of, I suppose, they don't want to go from being maybe great to extraordinary. And it's a bit of a cliche, but that's how I sort of see it.
Yeah, and it's almost like sometimes I think a high performer, or someone can mask as a high performer or present as a high performer in certain sets of incentives, right? So it almost depends what we're measuring as well, as far as our high performance. And I think especially in business and the corporate world, there are a lot of perverse incentives or outdated metrics where if we are stacking performance against these metrics, where we're actually measuring the wrong things when it comes to performance and these reward structures that we breed our executives within. And I like what you shared about how you got really good at sniffing these high performers out, and it sounds so human, some of the attributes that you described, where you admire them. These are people that you want to be like. There's something in them that you want to emulate, and they bring the team with them. So I'm hearing it's non-ego driven in a way when you say that. And so I'm curious, are there other characteristics that you learned along the way that are good indicators of, oh, this is a high performer and someone who can really help the whole ship rise? What are some of those characteristics?
I think a big one that I've really noticed over the years, and I love it, is the people who can turn complex into simple.
Mm.
I think especially with leadership and a lot of these terms today, we've got so many different variants now of leadership, and you see there's gigantic, wheels and flow charts of different types of leadership. And honestly, some of them I don't even understand them myself. I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I'm lost, and I think they're just trying to create positions or work for themselves, because leadership really is a very, very simple thing. And I mean, true leadership, it's about being good for your people. It's about, like I said before, you want your people to want to aspire to be that person. You've got to be that front and center. And like you said, you can only mask or bluff, for so long until you're actually exposed, if you're not that true character. And that's something that I love, though, is that turning complex into simple, and that real simple approach. And I find the higher that I've worked in life, and this is working with like a couple of our prime ministers, the person that runs our country, they actually are quite simple in their approach. They're not complex. Their mind is complex, but their delivery and how they outlay it to their staff and their plans are quite simple, because it works. It's fail-proof. If it's something is very simple, it works every time. And if you make it too complex, you are giving yourself that room to fail.
Mm.
So it's one of my big things that I love. And if I find that I'm running a course somewhere in corporate, and it's starting to turn into something that's morphing through your communication there with the staff, that's becoming too sort of out of control, you've got to really reel it in and bring it back to that simple, because not everybody may understand your logic, what you're explaining. But you understand it yourself in your own brain. If you've got this big complex plans, but not the outsiders don't maybe not get it as well. That maybe they don't understand it as well as you do. So if you can really, and I found this at university a lot, that a lot of the people there that have got these gigantic words and explanations, that they'd lose other people in translation. They're brilliant themselves, extremely smart, and but maybe they lose some of that, and people will nod their heads and like, I understand that. And it's like, yeah, no, you don't, because I don't understand what they're saying. And on my background, I'm not afraid to call somebody out and say, I've got no idea what you're talking about. You know,
That's good.
yeah, like you just got, and it's quite often, I think that happens more often than we think, that people don't understand, your own process. And I find that high performers, a lot of the ones that I've worked with, because they're so easy to work with, because they're very, very, like, they've got big plans, but they're simple in their approach, and they really make you understand what their goal is and what their objective is and what they're doing, what their path is they're going to follow. And it's like, here's my path, come with me, and they'll drag you along. They don't want to hide things. They don't want it to be that I suppose sometimes you get it in corporate, where people want to keep everything close to their chest. A lot of the leaders, they don't want to, tell you what their plans are, what they're doing, in the fear of maybe they're going to lose their position or lose that, lose that bonus. I don't know what it is, but it's very interesting.
Yeah, so I'm hearing transparency in there as well, but also this moving from complexity to simplicity, including in the ability to translate and communicate effectively, because I think sometimes the wires are not connecting properly, and if we can't really receive one another's signal, how can we actually organize? How can we tap into that collective intelligence, or the cohesion that we could experience within teams or high performance teams? um, so yeah, I love this piece about simplicity, and I can't help but think about nature as well. And I think a lot about this as someone who absolutely loves regenerative operations and nature inspired business models. And nature has a very small set of very simple rules that
Yeah,
life convenes around, and those simple rules have been tried and true and tested across millennia. And it's actually quite simple when you distill them down into just a handful, and then the creativity can sort of happen around that. The complexity can get bigger or smaller around those simple rules. But it's, in hearing you say that, there's something in my heart that warms a bit of like, that actually sounds a lot like how nature would do leadership too. And
yeah,
so
and you're right. And the way that the animals work, and the way that nature works, they take the most simple path. They don't make it hard for themselves. They make it easy.
exactly,
They do
yeah.
what works for them. And we ran our teams overseas like this. When you're dealing with that whole crisis and that risk every day, you've got to make it simple so that everyone understands what their role is, what they're doing. Now, I never micromanaged my guys. And I've seen that the really good leaders that are like that, they don't micromanage. They allow their people to do what they're good, at doing. They allow them to shine, to thrive. And you've got to have that faith and that trust in your team, because the whole collective, is based on that. You've got to have you've got to have your individual brilliance. You've got to have your individual high performers that are brilliant at what they do around you. But in order for that collective to flourish, everyone's got to work together in that environment. And I've seen that firsthand, how effective that is, how it works every day, day in, day out. My guys would know their roles. They would know what their tasks was. I was just there to tell them where we're going, what our timings were, and how we're getting there, how we're getting back. But as far as what they did, they knew their roles. And it was like a well-oiled machine every single day, year after year, with very, very few people leaving those roles, because it was so amazing to be part of.
When you say roles, my brain also translates that into really knowing your gifts as a leader or as an entrepreneur. And if we can show up in service, basically in ecosystem service, right? We'd call it in ecology, but that ecosystem service we provide can be really consistent. And if we're very clear about what our role is, I mean, maybe that can grow as our skills and our gifts develop further. But the clarity piece, the being clear on our role and where we fit in, there's something so deeply human about that, because I do believe at my core that people want to do a good job. They want to be seen for doing good work. And even children want to feel like they're contributing from a very young age within their families. So I do believe that there's something innate in us to want to contribute. But if we don't have the clarity, and if the role feels very ambiguous or complex, we can get easily overwhelmed by that and start to have some of that existential crisis of, where am I? Who am I? How do I fit in? I don't know how to actually plug my gifts into
Yeah.
this system. And then we lose so much human potential and so much collective intelligence. And so I want to lean into that with you a bit more around what have you seen in the space of collective intelligence? I'm so fascinated by how teams might work together effectively as well. So what have you noticed there?
I think you hit on a really good point before, where it's like that. I love that term, individual brilliance. It's understanding what you're good at, where your gifts lie, because we're not good at everything. You might be better at, driving a car than one person, but the other person's better at maybe reading the maps and navigating. And that can be in corporate as well, like, that whole setting. And it's about pulling those people together, because sometimes you don't have a choice with a team. It's like, this is a team we have. And so rather than actually working against each other, it's actually working at who does what well. And that's exactly what I did with my teams. They're like, okay, I've got one guy over here, Rob, he's amazing with the clients, the way he speaks to them. And he's going to be the sort of chief bodyguard in that team. Where I might have another guy called Dave, who he's a brilliant, 2IC. He's a guy that's amazing at reading maps and on communications. So he's going to be that 2IC. And that's what it's all about for us overseas, because we had to adapt on the fly every day. We had our missions, of course, we had our templates and what we were doing every day. But sometimes we had to adapt on the fly as well, on the run. We could never set patterns. We could not just go and do the same thing every day. Otherwise, we would be watched and monitored and filmed and then blown up. And that's the reality in that order. And
Right.
you've got to be smart, because you've got to realize there's people out there that are trying to harm us. It's not just going to work. It's going to work with obstacles every day. So you've got to think without being arrogant. You've got to think you're better than your opposition. You've got to think that you are better trained, that you have a better mindset, skill set, and better attitude than if you want to call them the opposition that are out there trying to do harm to you. So you've got to believe that you are better. You've got to be like one of those elite sports teams that goes out there, like the Chicago Bulls in their height. They believed that they could win every single match. They would go out there thinking that, we're going to win this tonight. And without, of course, you've got to put the effort in, but they had such self-belief and such skill set and all those years of training and hard work that you don't see behind the scenes of a great sporting team or any sort of team. There's not just, it doesn't just arrive overnight. It's years and years of dedication and hard work to get there. And I know I've been in that world for so long. And so, I understand what works and what doesn't work. And it's great to be part of that. It really is. It's a real buzz to be in that team environment that's really able to take anything on and prevail, over a long period of time. It's it's really is. It's you look back at a lot of it. I do now, and it's quite surreal. A lot of it, that world we lived in. It's almost a bit like a movie. It's like a movie set, the whole thing. And it's like you're sort of floating in it. And it's not until you get out of it, you look back at your experiences and you're like, wow, that was an incredible time. Because when you're in it, you're not thinking that way. You're thinking about staying alive. You're thinking about getting yourself and your teammates back home to their families. And that's your biggest thing. Of course, you have the mission, your objective to get those things completed every day, but you want to get everyone home safe. And that's the main things. And then you don't get that without that team environment. If you've got a team full of individual people that are brilliant, but they're not team players, it's just never going to work. It's just going to stumble and fall and fail. You're going to get that toxicity come in and that negative culture come in. And I know you hear it a lot these days about culture in the workplace, but it's so important. If you've got that great culture in any business, whether you have 20 staff or 200 or 2,000, and you want your people going to work on a Monday morning and loving what they do. You don't want them going to work Monday morning and all they're thinking about is Friday afternoon. That's what you do not want. And if you've got that staff under anybody that love doing what they're doing at work there, then life's easy, isn't it? It's just about steering that ship, and about letting your people shine and letting them do what they're good at.
Yeah, absolutely. And this piece that you brought in around self-belief is such a powerful one of not only adapting and witnessing just how adaptable and resilient we can be, but to have that mindset of, and I also believe I can do this. I believe I can win or survive or adapt. And so I'm curious. It's almost there's almost two places I want to go next. So maybe we'll go in each direction. But I wanna maybe table the toxic work culture piece and circle back around. But first, I wanna dive into this mindset of adaptability. And I mean, you faced a lot of loss, a lot of fear, or could have been faced with a lot of fear in these moments, in these experiences. So what were those mindsets or those self beliefs that got you through when things got really hard or really scary even?
Yeah, and I'll back you up there with the whole fear thing. Yeah, everybody over there had elements of fear and being scared at times. You can't be human if you're in a war zone, especially those first few years in Iraq when I was over there when the war started. It was insane. It was everything that you think that war is going to be, and times by 10. It was crazy on a daily basis. I believe back then there used to be 2,000 reportable incidents per day in Iraq. It was
Wow.
insane. It was insane, and a lot of incidents that never got reported. So yeah, it's like I said, it's not a mindset that's for everybody. Okay, and it's all about how you learn, I suppose. For myself personally, I just got to a point where I thought, you've just got to back what you're good at. You've got to back all those years of training, and you've got that responsibility of looking after, your own teammates. They're looking to you for that direction and leadership. So if you crumble, how are they going to perceive that? And it was such a big thing for me to want to get them, like I said before, want to get them home. And it's really, I suppose it's something that's hard to explain to people unless you've been there. That day in, day out, grind of that role, and what it takes to be. Like I said, you can't just wake up one day and feeling a little bit off and think, I'm just going to have the day off today. I'll call in sick. You just can't do that. You've literally got to be really, really, on your bed and can't get out of bed before you actually will be, the mission will be cancelled. And the responsibility of the clients, and the money at stake, the actual, the costing of the whole environment there, it was, unbelievable, the money involved as well, and a lot of pressure to get it right, a lot of pressure from above to get it right. And especially the roles that we were doing over there, and how much emphasis there was on, the world's media and politicians were all watching us to get this right, what we were doing over there with the elections. And we were doing a lot of work behind the scenes with the elections over there in Iraq. The first time they've ever had elections in that country ever, independent elections, and we were behind the scenes making sure that was all working effectively. So the pressure was massive. It was from your president was basically watching that at the time, and it's really is attuned to that whole environment, and having that incredible sort of team of people around you to make that sort of work.
I mean, hearing you just list out the different contextual pressures and the different areas that falls into, right? It's financial, it's physical, it's political, it like environmental. I mean, just the level of pressure that you're describing, I think most people who have not experienced that will never actually experience it in their lives. um yeah, wow, wow, wow. And I can only imagine burnout in that context as well, and having to fight through the self leadership and the self responsibility that one might feel, where it's not showing up actually isn't an option. I mean, even a lot of executive leaders, like when we're talking about a work context, there still is an option to call out sick or to
That's right.
change jobs or to reconfigure teams. I mean, I suppose you could maybe do that in the military as well, but um, yeah, to what we can show up to when not showing up isn't a choice is pretty remarkable when it comes to the self leadership and level of responsibility that you're talking about.
Yeah, look, the things that we had to do on the run is our missions were basically working in 72-hour increments. So you're effectively on 3 missions at the same time. So your process starts 3 days out from when a mission will go ahead. So, but the day after you're on that process from when you first started that other mission, you're already on your second day of another mission, and then the third day you're on mission for another task. You know what I mean? So you're this constant, revolving door. So your headspace has got to be there all the time of the mission you're on, but the one that's coming the next day and the one who's coming the day after that. And this is how it works all the time. And you're right with it. That burnout is such a big factor. You've really got to pace yourself in regards to your, I suppose, training. If you've got to remain, I suppose you have to be physically fit over there. You've got to be above, what most people think is fit. You've got to be at a real level of fitness. You may have to get out and run for your life with 20 kilos of body armor on. You might have to go and run a kilometer with that weight on with a client, and under fire, under gunfire. And this is the reality of what you may face, especially in those specialty roles that we were doing over there. And you've got to manage that physical side of it. You've got to manage your mental side of things as well. It's that real juggle and to avoid burnout. And you'll notice it in we touched on it earlier about one of your teammates, where they go through that change. Something changes in that person. You expect that person to be at a certain level every day, and you'll notice those little subtle changes. And those subtle changes they'll manifest each day, and it gets more noticeable each day. And you think, okay, what's up with this person? Something's going on. Is it the burnout from the job? Have they got something going on back home, in Australia or back in the States with their family? It's on their mind. And you've got to juggle that. And that was another difficult part as being a team leader. You're not just juggling the missions, you're juggling your people and juggling their lives. And so
Right.
the team leaders that could last for years and years over there without burning out themselves, I think it's a real testament to those people, because it's a tough job. It wasn't easy. And you're dealing with the
Yeah.
elements of the heat. You're working in, we had an average of 48 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is, and if you comprehend that, but it's insane.
Insanely hot.
And we're wearing flight suits. We're in these charcoal fireproof flight suits every day.
Wow.
With all of our combat gear on, and Kevlar helmets and gloves, and it's so hot you can't open a car door without gloves on. You can't hold a weapon without gloves on. You know what I mean?
Wow.
It is insane. It's so debilitating, and the dust is everywhere. You can clean your desk the night before you go to bed. The next morning you wake up in your sealed room, and there's a layer of dust on your desk. So you're breathing that stuff in every day, and so you've got to manage not just the physical, but you've got to manage the physical and the mental aspect of it that every day. It really is that you get better at it as you go on. Of course, you start understanding where your own strengths and weaknesses lie, and how to sort of how to work on that.
I appreciate you painting the visceral details there of walking us through what the environment was actually like, and that it's this physical and mental toughness that you constantly have to be attuned to, not only in yourself but in each other. And what I'm hearing or seeing in what you're saying too is that the health of the team is dependent on the health of the individuals. And if you've got one team player who's really suffering, I mean, that could really
Yeah.
impact the whole situation, the health, well-being, and even lives of the whole team in this acute situation. So I'm really seeing, like, at the micro and macro level, how important being transparent about that, and getting to get really good at reading where people are truly at emotionally, physically, mentally, so that you as a leader, I assume, can then do what you need to do to recalibrate there. But it's just so powerful. And I want to switch gears a little bit into, because we have our environmental context that you've just described. I think another context that can feel as real as our tangible environment is the context of our culture, which we started to touch on here,
Yeah.
and the context of our social relationships. I mean, they can feel threatening, they can feel triggering, they can put us in a state of fight or flight. There's so much there in our own relational trauma that we might have from our upbringing. It's a different circumstance, of course, and the body can get really up in arms about it as we process these emotions. And workplace toxicity, I I think, has probably always been there in different forms, but our awareness of how workplace toxicity shows up in the forms of inequality or not having inclusive policies. I mean, there's so much that we're becoming more acutely aware of, and shifting or evolving into a better context. But when, in your experience, when you think about what what behaviors or mindsets create a toxic work culture, like what are some of those behaviors that in this petri dish of culture are actually really detrimental or even dangerous? What shows up for you there?
Look, I think with any toxic culture, whether it's in the corporate environment, or anywhere, any professional environment, it's either going to be come from the top, or it's going to be in that sort of lower end in the management itself. Now, whether it's a giant corporation that has an element that's actually been allowed to manifest to get to that toxic level, and the actual senior leaders there in the execs have actually got no idea what's going on. I think that's a lot of the time I do see that in big organizations. There's massive companies with staff and different floors and levels, and they don't know what's going on from floor to floor. So it's all about whether you have that a culture. Like I was in a business a while ago that had a prime example where it was the middle management, that you had a bunch of mates there all working together that were just running that place and allowing, and there was a lot of nepotism there. So like bringing their own buddies, their own friends in there. And it was a really bad environment. And they identified in the end that it was one individual that was the one that was causing all the trouble there. And when I took that up to that senior level, I was actually dealing with the CEO himself there. And it's like it's a very, very simple fix here. You've got this problem here, and you've basically got a monster working in your organization. And this wasn't something that was determined over one day. This was discovered over weeks and weeks and weeks of working with these people. And if you allow it to manifest, and you allow that rot to take place in the organization, it just spreads like a cancer. And people become so disillusioned, and they become so despondent, upset, and you can see it on their faces. And it's really sad, and it's so unnecessary. And I agree with what you said. It's getting better. We're becoming so much more aware now of what's expected of people from their behaviour to how they go about their positions. That it is getting better slowly. And you talk about, I suppose, inclusive, behaviour as well. I mean, I've seen some great female leaders starting to really come out and shine now, and that was something even just 20 years ago, it wasn't as prevalent. Go back to when I grew up in the 70s and 80s, it was like non-existent. I think there was back then I think the first female CEO of a Fortune 500 was appointed in about, I think it was 72, first one. And now, even in the I think now it's in corporate, it's around about 65-35 is about the percentage. So still a lot more men involved, especially at that board level, that exec level. The women they're catching up, but it's taking time. But at that real elite level of your top 100 organizations, there's still a mass majority of men that are running those organizations. And don't get me wrong, I've worked with some brilliant male leaders as well. But it should get to a point in life where we're not discussing whether it's right or wrong, whether it's male or female or whatever gender it is. It should just be about who the best person for that position is. That's where we need to be at. And that may take more generations. I don't know if we'll ever get there properly. But it may not ever be perfect, that model. But that's where we sort of, I think, need to be at, where we're just picking the best person for the job. And that's, you can only get to that level though when you have everybody in the basket together. You can't have somebody with an advantage of always being at the upper level. And
Mhm.
whether the females are trying to get up to that level, but they've been inhibited and pushed down. So it's and I said that a lot in corporate, of course, and a lot of people don't want to speak about it, but I'm not like that. I'll say it how I see it, but it breaks my heart a lot. It does when you see horrible cultures, and it's so, like I said before, unnecessary. It just doesn't need to be this way. And if you don't identify it, and if you don't identify the problem, and it can be anything. I had another environment where I had a senior executive he was being pretty horrible to his staff. And when I really broke it all down with him, I got him out of that environment. I got him out of that building, and we went for a walk one day and had a bit of a chat about it. And it was actually his personal life. I knew it was. So I could pick it straight away that it was something going on with his personal life. He was going through a bad divorce and a custody battle, and that was the problem. But he was taking it out in his staff. And when you have it from the top, then it's going to then filter through to the rest of your staff, and everyone's going to start hating on each other, and that's a really bad environment. So,
Yeah.
you've got to really, I suppose, just have that real ability in any environment to try and fix what's going on there, what's rotting away.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's even just the image of rot, or I guess toxicity as well, right? It's like the body can have toxic buildup, and there's a process, right, for detoxifying that and letting it leave the system that can take time. And I
Yeah,
do think that we're very much in that time period now. At least I deeply hope. And I can't help but notice one thing you seemed to point to there was how sometimes it can come down to an individual who is showing up in the dynamics of a group, and maybe they're showing up as the alpha, maybe they're exhibiting control based, ego based behavior where they can sort of get the team to go along with some of this toxic behavior, especially if that team is afraid of them, or if they're claiming or hoarding power, information, whatever it might be, to cling to that positional power that they might be hungry for. And I think often, as you alluded to, there's something more personal going on there often, where maybe that person has something going on at home. Maybe they have unresolved or unhealed trauma in how they're actually treating themselves. Because I don't know if you've noticed this in what you've seen as well, but I often find that we treat others how we treat ourselves. So if our self-talk is incredibly negative, or we have a lot of self-loathing going on, we don't have that self-belief that we talked about earlier, then that inner culture that we might have is sort of rotten as well. And it's no
yeah.
wonder to me that permeates or builds up to a point where it overflows and then comes into our relationships and the cultures we create at work. So I mean, often on the podcast we're talking about how that inner work, that deep healing work at the individual level, isn't separate from an effective leadership practice. And I'm sort of hearing that in what you're saying, and I'm curious how, if at all, has that shown up in your world? Have you seen people actually overcome toxic behavior and come out on the other side as maybe a better leader if they were able to heal some of those more rotten patterns?
Yeah, I've seen it quite a lot, and I think you're going to get both answers. You're going to
Mm,
get some people out there, and I had a prime example of a fellow team leader overseas that was having a lot of problems with his team and his teammates, and it even got to the point where a couple of his teammates approached me, which is something you generally don't do in that environment for answers. So they were pretty desperate. When you get a knock on your door at 10 o'clock at night, you know, that's where it's reached a new level of toxicity. And I worked in that proper alpha male environment, that cohort, for years. So I understand it better than anybody. Believe me, it's dog eat dog, that world. And when it gets to that level, and I tried talking to his team leader, who was a decent guy, very, very good at what he did, but it was too far gone, and he had just let it manifest for years and years and years. And in the end, he actually lost his position over it. He lost his very, very highly paid tax-free position. He just couldn't change. Yet
Wow.
I've seen the other side of the coin. I've seen it in corporate as well, where somebody can turn it around. Absolutely. They're going through a bad phase. That one I was talking about before, that exec, the gentleman that was going through a bit of a bad phase in his life, he was able to turn it around and really reinstall and really reinvigorate that culture in that environment. And that was a big organization. That wasn't some little firm. That was a pretty decent sized organization. So I believe it can happen, but it's got to be, the individual's got to want to change. That person has to want to change. You can't do it for them. You can advise them, you can guide them, you can help them, but if they don't want to do it themselves, they've got to. I went through a bad phase myself where I had a lot of loss overseas, and then I came home and I was going through a very bad divorce. And then my father died. It was like everything was compounding at the same time. And, I ended up making that decision through, I'm with a lovely lady now, and she was the one that really helped me to go and talk to somebody. And I did. First time in my life I actually went and spoke to a person for that bit of advice, just a bit of help there, and to really reassess and get yourself out of that bad phase you're going through, and get your mentality back on track. And I think a lot of my former colleagues that really suffered, a lot of them took their lives because they didn't seek that help. They didn't go and talk to a psychologist, a psychiatrist, or whatever it is, somebody to actually try and help them through that bad phase. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with putting your hand up and saying, hey, I need a bit of help here. I'm really struggling with this. I've seen, witnessed personally, the biggest, strongest, toughest guys you can ever imagine, special forces operators that have taken their lives because they didn't reach out for help, and they ultimately, and once you're gone, Nicole, you're not coming back. You're gone, and it's a tragedy. It really is, and it's a really, really sad state of affairs.
Yeah. Yeah, it truly is. I commend you for doing that deep work and asking for the help and then going out and getting it. I think sometimes we don't realize how dire these toxic environments or these highly stressful environments can be on our mental well-being. And we were just talking the other day, my team over at Harvard University in the exec ed program that we run, about how we've seen work trauma play out to a point where if someone has experienced that deep work trauma and they don't know what that is, or they don't go get the help, like they might not be taking their lives in the acute situation that you're describing, but they don't come back. Like the light in their eyes doesn't come back. And I don't think that leaders who are exhibiting these toxic behaviors necessarily realize that through bullying or control or just being unkind, just straight up with words and how we speak to one another, it's like this can ripple into really unhealthy coping mechanisms for people, whether it's dipping into very poor mental health or alcoholism or isolation. And so there's a sensitivity that I'm feeling in this conversation around the impact that toxic work culture can have. And I think if someone has either been like the perpetrator, right, of the toxic work culture, or the quote unquote victim of the toxic work culture, there's a lot of deep work that has to come on the tail end of that to actually heal from it. And sometimes people might not come back, which again is such a loss. It's a loss of human potential. It's a loss of human life in the case that you're describing. And that piece is so tragic to me. It's like I really see what's at stake as leaders in all sectors here in the world, or the future that we create through our cultures.
Yeah, I really believe as well that to be in that mind space where you have a leader or anybody who's coming down hard on their staff, like you said, whether it's bullying and the way they speak down to them, it's hard work. It's actually, I think it must be hard work and for that person and it must sap the energy out of them to actually be not nice, to be nasty. My daughter made a great point the other week like that. She said it must be really hard work to be not nice. It's actually much easier just to be nice to people in life. You know what I mean? It's like all that energy you're consuming and using to actually be nasty. And I don't really understand it. It must be something inside those people, I suppose, that they just, it's just how their brain functions maybe. And it's the ones that can come back. That's fantastic. And like you said, there's the other side of the coin, the ones that can't, or the ones that just, like you said, they just fade away. And it's very sad for the people that are the ones who are targeted as well, that you lose these great people because they just can't put up with it anymore. They just don't take it. They can't take it anymore. They're not mentally tough or mentally strong, and they just leave. And and it can have a profound effect on those people for years. Sometimes that workplace bullying and harassment, and it's just, I think as a human being, you must, and I don't understand people who don't feel terrible about it. That maybe finding it down the track that somebody left because of that person. They left an organization, and you think, I know school is a cruel place, and school can be very tough when you're young. But you'd like to think when you get into your adult years that should disappear, but it doesn't. Sometimes it gets worse, and it really is a shame. But I mean, for us overseas on my teams, I just refuse to put up with it. If somebody was like that on the team, they couldn't stay. They wouldn't last. We had a culture that was so incredible, and so professional, and we weren't just like robots. We used to have a lot of laughs on the team, and a lot of humor that most people would probably find pretty crass, but that's how we got around it. That's how we survived over there together all those years. But we had such a great culture, and that was from guys from different parts of the world. A lot of guys from the UK and the States, and I still speak to those operators all these years later. We still keep contact because we had such a great culture there. And I think it's a real I think it's a real important point, that if the definition of a really great leader is they're still speaking to their people many years after they've parted ways. It's a real good example of that person did a great job, because they're still in touch with their teams and their people that worked under them for years, but that's how well they treated them. They still want to be part of their life. I think it's a great example.
Yeah, I agree. I love that. It's almost like, if that's the case, it means that the relationship wasn't just transactional. It wasn't just, let me extract this value from you. It means the relationship was human,
Yeah.
and that is so beautiful. And I feel like the flip side of the coin here, to sort of end on a high note as we wrap up our deep conversation. I mean, we've traversed loss, we've traversed bullying, toxicity. There's so much here, high performance, but I want to flip that coin that we were just investigating, where it like hurt people is really what I believe. And so if that is true, it makes me feel hopeful, actually, that that healing work is in our control. And like you said, people have to choose that. They have to be ready for it. They have to want it. But and you hear this in other spaces. If we're the problem, we can also be the solution. And I hope that through cultures where these more conscious, high performing leaders are modeling and embodying these healthier ways of leading, that it sets the tone, it sets the example for others to step into that culture, to even begin to investigate these things of, oh, I didn't know that was possible. I didn't know I could have good mental health and not burn out at work. I didn't know I could have boundaries. I didn't know I didn't
Yeah.
have to put up with this bullshit. Like, I mean, it's amazing when you see it modeled. You go, oh, okay, something healthier, something more regenerative, more human is possible. So I hope that for those of us doing the work and getting the help in mental health, that let that be an invitation, and let that be sort of this safe space, if we're transparent about it and speaking about it as we are now,
Yeah.
where others feel safe enough to maybe choose that themselves, or at least investigate it, and to put a stop to some of these harmful patterns that we see in schools, in work, in families. I mean, the work heals all of those areas at once, I feel. So anyway, bit of a rant there, but I guess, Mark, do you do you have any final words of perhaps hope or what you see coming down the pipeline in terms of leadership that we can look forward to or expect in say the decade to come?
I think it's going to be a real transitional time. I think COVID has really expedited that change as well. It's made people really aware of their environments, what that they what's going to work for them, what's going to work for the business going forward. I think for leaders, they're going to have to be very adaptable and very understanding moving forward of different work environments, whether it's hybrid working environments, whether it's shorter weeks or staff working from home. It's going to be really interesting to see how that all pans out in the future. And I think there's a lot of positive signs. It's just how whether these current models that we're seeing right now in a corporate sort of more like corporate environment with empty offices and things like this, whether that comes back to being a bit more sort of normal, how it was maybe 5 years ago, or whether it actually continues on, and we just still have a certain majority of staff, because some organisations they have to have staff there. You can't just do everything on Zoom. But other models, you don't need that. You don't even have to go onto work. You can work out of your home if you work in IT or things like this. Maybe they have to have one or two Zoom meetings a week, and then they can do their own thing. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that goes. But I think for leadership, it's going to have to be, like I said before, that real adaptability, that understand that people in the future, especially the younger generation coming through now, they're pretty fearless. They're not scared to or frightened to leave a job anymore at will. Years ago when I was working in that environment, people kept their jobs for years because they're scared to leave. Even in a toxic environment, they're just scared to leave because they've got mortgages. But a lot of young kids coming through now, they're just like, I'm not going to put up with this. I'm out of here. I'm gone. And they're leaving now that I'm seeing in corporate. You may say this yourself as well, Nicole. They're leaving in teams now.
Yeah.
This is a new trend. I had one a while ago, 16 people on this team. They left. Bang, we're going to a rival organisation in 2 weeks' time. Like,
Wow.
holy, and that director I was dealing with, she was a COO. She almost had a meltdown over it. What am I going to do? I said, I don't know. There's no quick answer for you. I can't give you a golden answer there. Like you're 16, staff, and they were very important to that organisation going to a rival because they weren't happy anymore. They felt they've been disrespected and not enough love going around, I suppose. I think they actually had a pretty decent reason to be. There was a lot of messages there that they didn't read the room, that organisation, and they lost all those staff. And so I think that's going to be a big one going forward. And I hope that education of just culture and what's expected, how people should be treated in the workplace gets better. And that's all the hope, isn't it? That we just get better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, it has been such a pleasure. Thank you for leaving us with those thoughts as we wrap up today. And if people want to learn more about you or follow your work, where can they find you online?
Yeah, so my business is very simple. It's just markashbyconsulting.com. Your listeners can email me directly at markashby.consulting.com. I'm quite prevalent on LinkedIn as well. And so that's my sort of big platform for getting all of my information out there. And I'm actually just about to start writing for an industry expert magazine. And it's called That Industry Expert, and that's going to be a pretty exciting venture as well. So I'll be doing a monthly sort of piece on high performance leadership in that magazine as well.
Right on. Congrats. That's great.
Yeah, fantastic.
Wow. Well, thank you again, Mark. And listeners, thanks so much for tuning in. And I think we'll leave you with the message today that remember, if you can heal yourselves, you can heal your culture, and together we can ground a better future for businesses and humanity. So thanks for listening today. We'll see you next week. The Inner Work work is often the hardest work, but it is the work required for lasting change and a healthier future for us all. If you found the show valuable, please leave a review and subscribe. You can also take a deeper dive with me at NicoleBelisle.com. Thanks again for being here and showing up for your new self. Your future self will certainly thank you.